is I, Tentus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my expose on the history of Magic the Gathering, where I go by set, release by release, describing to you the sets, giving you some history about it, a little bit of information about the sets, and continue on. This week, we have Unglued. Now, Unglued was released on August 11th, 1998, and had 94 cards. So this was the first supplement that was not part of an expansion that was released as part of Magic. And it was meant to be a kind of fun and wacky set that was different from anything else Wizards had put out before. Now there were 83 silver bordered cards, 5 black bordered basic land cards. So this set actually only had one basic land art per card, and they were full art cards. And then it also had 6 tokens that are released with it. So it was a set that released tokens directly with it, unusual for anything up until now. Now, other than the Planeswalker cards, which were to come from now, this and its follow-up set of Unhinged were the only sets to have art that extended beyond the normal borders of art on a card. So that was an unusual thing, that it didn't have art that went beyond the normal square border where art should be on a card. The greatest example of this is the BFM, the big furry monster, which was, the art was on 2 different cards. It was so big. So you had to have 2 cards to play it. It had a number of sort of minor mechanics with chickens and die rolls and things relating to team players, but none of the mechanics were sort of major in it per se. It did try to introduce a whole bunch of unusual and weird mechanics, like doing things that you as a player had to do physical things in the real world because of cards being played, or the die roll where you're rolling 6-sided die. There was a whole bunch of things that introduced with 6-sided die in this set, so that was probably the biggest mechanic there was in it. One of the mechanics happened to also be chickens, a sort of creature type they introduced. Now, many of the graphical designs that were found in these cards that are sort of just, not ever thought to be legal, have actually moved into some of the tournament legal things, such as full art lands, which have seen people use them in more tournament legal situations. Now it had a number of cycles in this. Of course, it had a cycle of chickens, as I mentioned. It had a cycle of double spells, that each color they had a double type spell that would do something. It had the rock, paper, scissors creatures, that each of these creatures failed to be effective against its correct type and was super effective against its other ones. Like the hand game rock, paper, scissors is exactly like that. That the connections between rock, paper, scissors work in the rock, paper, scissors creatures. And it also had a cycle of cards that talked about teammates, that affected them. This was actually the first one that talked about having more than 2 players in a game, more of a multiplayer games, but this one discussed specifically having team-based games with 2 sides going at it. Most of its creature types have been sort of removed since then and aren't seen as being any kind of creature type that exists now. And since 2014, when the entire thing was seen as being basically banned from tournaments, it has been illegal to play with cards in any kind of tournament setting since then. So the cards certainly are not tournament legal. Now, all 94 cards, if put in set order, have a single word at the bottom, which when read all together, creates like secret message that the entire set had. Now, it also did have a number of unusual symbols for mana that have since been gotten rid of. Now, the Y symbol had appeared sort of before and has since been removed from the rules, but it also increased a Z symbol. Both 3 were supposed to be X, Y, and Z were supposed to be different variables. Now, most of the time, they just have one variable and have different formulas for figuring it out if it's more than one thing on a card. Now, they did originally plan a sequel that was announced in summer of 1999. Unfortunately, it never came to pass, though some of the art and things that were developed for it were both used for Unhinged when it was released, so it was in the sort of spiritual successor, and also some of it actually did find its way into tournament play when some of the cards actually were found to be, that they were developing, were found to actually function decently, not have too unusual of rules. Now, its symbol is a cracked egg, apropos for the entire thing, and it was actually developed when a bunch of the creators and developers were talking about things they had cut out or ideas that they had which would never fit in any of the expansions when they were working on them. So they threw all that stuff together and came up with this idea of a set. Now, there is actually one keyword that is introduced in this set that is in effectively like one card, and it should be mentioned, though, it is Denim Walk. It's like Land Walk, except if your opponent is wearing denim, it's unblockable. Kind of unusual. Now let's talk about some of these cards, because they're kind of unusual. There's Ashnod's Coupon. It costs you 0 to cast. You can tap and sacrifice it to have target player go get you a drink. You have to pay for the drink. It's an example of physical movement you're forcing on someone else. There's the BFM, or Big Furry Monster. It cost you 15 mana to cast. It was a 99.99. It was in 2 cards. You literally needed 2 cards in order to play this one. It's kind of ridiculous, but interesting in a way that they designed it. There's Blacker Lotus. You could tap and sacrifice it and tear it into 4 pieces. You got 4 mana of any color. You remove those 4 pieces from the game. It's an example of card destruction they had in the set. There's the Burning Cinder Fury, etc., etc. I'm not going to name this long name. It had this art on its side, so the card was literally sideways. This is something that's shown up in cards since then in the dual cards, but this is the first example of it. When a player tapped a permanent, they would give it to their opponent until end of turn. If you didn't do this at some point during your turn, tap on a permanent, you would take 3 damage at the end of your turn. A weird sort of thing that you would give your opponent stuff until end of turn, and then you would take damage if you didn't. There was Chaos Confetti. 4 tap, shred it into little pieces. Drop it from 5 feet above the board, and whatever little the pieces land on is destroyed. This is actually because of something that happened in one of the tournaments previously. Someone took a Chaos Orb, and the Chaos Orb is normally you flip it up in the air. Whatever it lands on gets destroyed. It has to be a certain distance above the board. They tore it up and did the exact same. So it was a kind of homage to that occurring before Wizards said, don't destroy cards. There's the Chicken King. It's a chicken. It was a 2/2. You could tap a chicken to roll a die. Whenever a 6 is rolled on a die, you put a +1/+1 counter on each chicken you control. There's Clam I Am. It's a clamfolk, a type of creature they came up with for this set that they had a couple of. This one, whenever you would roll a 3 on a d6, you were able to re-roll it. There's Flock of Rabid Sheep. It cost you X and 2 green. For this one, you would flip X coins. Your opponent would call it each time. For each one you would win, you would put a 2/2 sheep token into play. Thank you, sheep token. There's Get a Life. You and your teammate switch your life totals. It's a team-based one. There's Gus. This talks about previous games of Magic. It's a 2/2 that, when it comes to play with a +1/+1 counter on it for each game of Magic you've lost to the opponent you're fighting since the last time you've won. That's an interesting one, too. Hungry Hungry Heifer, a 3/3 cow that during your upkeep you have to remove a counter from a permanent you control or you sacrifice it. There's Heirloom Wrangler. It's the 2/2 Denim Walk creature. I wanted to include this when I'm talking about them. The Denim Walk one. There's Incoming. When you cast it, each player can search their library for any number of creatures, lands, enchantments, artifacts, and put them into play. Everything in everybody's decks comes out. Woo! There's the Jester's Sombrero. You can pay some mana, tap and sacrifice it to look at target opponent's sideboard. Talking about sideboard, which we haven't really mentioned much at all, and remove 3 cards of it for the remainder of the matches you're going to have. So you edit out the matches of sideboard that, after your first match, you probably want to use it then before someone starts playing around with their sideboard. There's Look at Me, I'm in the DCI. You can choose a card that's not a basic land card and put a ban on it. It's not allowed to be used as long as you're having a match with this person. They give more exact rules on what that ban means, but that's the gist of it. There's Mirror Mirror. It costs you 7 to cast. It comes into play tapped. You tap and sacrifice it. You literally switch places with an opponent. You switch life totals. You switch hands. You switch cards in play. You switch libraries. You switch graveyards. Everything about you two has been switched. You should just each stand up, move around to each other's sides of the board where you were sitting, and sit back down, replacing each. There's a sheep token. I wanted to add it in. There's also squirrel tokens. I wanted to add it in. There's the ultimate nightmare of the Wizards of the Coast customer helpline. It costs you X, Y, and Z mana and 2 red, and it's a blue spell. That's already a what? That it costs you red mana and it's a blue spell, and it costs you X, Y, and Z. You do X damage to any of Y creatures and Z players. Oh yeah. Woo! There's Timmy, Power Gamer. He's a 1/1, and for 4 mana you can put a creature from your hand into play. You're power gaming. And finally, there's Volrath's motion sensor. This is an enchant player long before the curses, which were enchant players, came out. You would play it on an opponent. You'd choose an opponent, one of their hands, like actual hands, not hand of cards, and they would have to balance Volrath's motion sensor on it. If they ever dropped it off, they would lose 3 life. So you have to balance a card on your hand for whatever period of time, and it's your hand, choose which hand it would be. So that's it for today. I talked about Unglued, a crazy, unusual, weird set that they put out that was best described as a wacky, most described as some kind of parody of the very game itself, with unusual and strange mechanics, which will probably never be seen again unless they decide to put out a similar set again. So if you want to find some of them, enjoy some of the unusual nature of the set. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave it in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to support for the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. If you want to show some more support for the channel and the Empire, please check out my Patreon page, linked in the description below. Can show some more support that way. But until the next time, I bid you farewell.